Hello everyone, this is World Experience from World Lab XR, and here we speak about augmented and virtual reality. And today our guest is Andreea, a person who is just phenomenal. We've just read her biography and it seems amazing. I hope you guys will like this podcast. And today we're going to speak about design for AR, for VR, about design philosophy, because Andreea is just a person who has so many accomplishments that I think it'll be too complicated to cover them in one episode. But I hope that we can touch some topics that you guys would like to listen. So Andreea, can you please just tell a little bit about yourself? Because I think that not everyone who's listening to this podcast knows some of the amazing facts that you have about yourself.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm looking forward to all the questions I'm going to get. I am a traditionally trained architect who fell in love with VR. And then I quit my job in traditional architecture to try to figure out how I'm going to combine VR and architecture in a way that's kind of meaningful and interesting to me. So in a way that goes beyond just visualizing buildings. And then I started a company in Germany that's called Numenavr. And it's been 5 years now since we've been on this wild journey of figuring out how we bring together coding, architecture, design, UX with this crazy new tech.
Okay, so I would really much like to know your opinion on the importance of XR actually becoming something in the history of the humanity, because even like 15 years ago, people were dreaming about things like augmented and virtual reality, and now it's a thing. And in your opinion, how this could change our understanding of exchanging our experience with each other?
Sure. So I'm going to give you two examples. One is very specific, and it comes from architecture, which is the field that I'm the most familiar with. Well, as you know, before VR, we used to just draw things and paint things and make sketches. And no one really knew what a building felt like or what a space felt like until the building was finished many years later and a huge amount of money later. And now for the first time in the history of mankind, we're able to test space before we spend crazy amounts of money building it. And we're able to bring people into VR and even design with them inside VR so that everyone understands what they're getting. So that, for me, from the perspective of architectural history, is just amazing, and I think is going to just change the way cities and buildings look like. And another thing that's very interesting to me that I also think is going to change mankind, I mean, this is kind of a crazy statement, but I'm just going to make it. I think the fact that in VR, we are not really ourselves in many ways. So, of course, I don't instantly become another person when I put a headset on. I'm still myself. But the longer you spend interacting with different virtual worlds, the more you get ideas in your head like, well, what is my body? Am I really a humanoid person in VR? Or can I become an octopus like we know from various studies? Can I become something else? I move in different ways. I can float. Maybe my voice is different because I'm using a social world that's translating my voice because I'm interacting with a person who doesn't speak my language. So gradually you realize that it's not so obvious that who you are in real life is the same person that you are in these virtual worlds. So I think this is going to open up a future of humanity where we might have different identities in a way that's kind of super exciting and interesting, and we're just starting to untangle what it really means.
So do you think that VR can help us to be more conscientious and kind of understand yourself and the world around you better? So in your opinion, can VR help us to understand the real world in a more better way?
I think it can help us ask the right questions, because there's a lot in what you just said. So it's very hard to have a common definition of what the real world is. So if you're a scientist, the real world is made out of floating atoms and fields of radiation, like that's the real world. If you ask a biologist, the real world is the way our cells work and eyes and plants and all of this living stuff. And if you ask a philosopher that's into introspection, the real world has nothing to do with what's outside us. The real world is in our minds. So it's not so easy to figure out what the real world is. But the fact that VR throws us into this universe where we do not have physical reality anymore already instantly gives us an amazing perspective, because we're already in a dimension where we are just not in physical reality anymore. So I think it opens up an important door and an important perspective to start perhaps having a shot at asking the right questions.
Okay, so here I would ask you, I think, a pretty right question. So, as you said, that VR lets us test different spaces and environments before actually building them. But do you think that there will be a point in time in our history where we will stop building real things, and the only way and the only things that we will build is virtual spaces and virtual worlds? Because if VR becomes very easy to use, if it is really easy to walk in VR, to interact with different things, what is the reason for building actual buildings, for building anything actual, if you can just build everything inside VR and just let people to live in an amazing world without seeing all of the bad things that are happening around in the real world?
Yeah, exactly. That's the question, right? It's fantastic. And it's amazing that we have this tech to ask exactly this question in a context that's not sci-fi, right? Like, even 10 years ago, I would have thought, okay, this is 100% sci-fi. And how unbelievable is it that it's not? And here we are taking such questions very seriously. So I think architecture will definitely be thrown in an unbelievable crisis. It is already by VR. We are already seeing conferences taking place in virtual spaces. We're seeing both architects and designers building virtual venues and platforms, and this talk about the metaverse. So yeah, so what's physical architecture for? The most basic answer is that somewhere in one of the realities we have at our disposal, which is our base reality, physical reality, or the way some VR developers call it, mid-space. So in mid-space, our bodies still live in mid-space, and we need to protect them from the elements. So we need to protect them from cold, from hot, from rain. So we do need some kind of physical structure. Now, are we gonna end up in a dystopian future where we're just plugged in to these other amazing worlds and our bodies just live in some kind of jail cell bunker to protect us from the rain? I hope not. But how are we gonna prevent that? I don't have a clear answer to that.
But the question is there even a sense for preventing that? Because looking at you and at your experience of being a very cool, an amazing architect, who got very good reviews, and you got very good nominees when you were like finishing your master degrees, and then you're deciding, instead of building real buildings, I'll go and build virtual ones. Maybe you have a vision of this dystopian future happening in real life, and you're just thinking of, okay, if in like 50 years nobody's going to live in real buildings, maybe there is a reason of getting inside VR and starting building virtual ones, so in 50 years I'm going to be super rich and I'm going to be ahead of everybody. Was that your motivation, Andreea?
Oh, this is like the best question I ever got. What's my motivation? So my company is still designing both physical buildings and virtual spaces.
Okay.
Although virtual spaces are a higher priority. I think there are still elements of human experience that you can only tap into in physical spaces. That's why I'm not willing to give them up. So I believe we enrich people's lives and we just make people better when we are able to offer them just a very wide range of possible experiences where they can feel themselves being human in many different circumstances. And if we completely give up physical space and physical reality, we would be cutting off a huge chunk of experience, because there is still something about smelling something or touching the roughness of a stone that is hard to replicate in virtual reality. Now, are we gonna get these companies that are already working on haptic gloves and haptic feedback to completely replicate that, to completely replicate any part of sensory experience from physical reality? Probably, probably. Then is there gonna be anything left in physical reality? Will physical reality be able to offer us any dimension of human experience that we are not able to replicate? I don't have the answer to that. I would say, in a way, probably not.
So I think you understand, as a person who has finished an architecture school, that urbanism and the cities and the spaces that we live in, they in some way affect our behavior. And that if you live in a nice area, in a nice district with nice city planning, you're going to have a happy life. And the rates of crime in this nice area are going to be lower than in an area that is not developed, than an area where houses are built improperly, where it's hard to achieve and to get to certain destinations. So urbanism can actually reduce the level of crimes and change people's lives into a better way. So maybe it will be much cheaper and much more cost effective to go to undeveloped areas of cities and just give people VR headsets and give them this experience of living in a nice urban area with nice city planning, but in virtual reality. And by this, change their behavior and make this area much more safe with low rates of crime and etc. What do you think about that?
I think everyone will be in VR for a good portion of their day, rich or poor. And this will force us to completely unlearn everything we know today about urbanism. We will have to rethink about how we create urban life and safe societies given this mixture of realities. And we're going to be switching every day in between these realities. And one of the realities we're going to be dealing with is physical reality, but that's just one segment. So what notions of collective living and urbanism will have to develop to just organize and make sense of this suddenly very complex urban life? That's the challenge. And part of the work that I'm doing is to make more and more architects, traditionally trained architects, aware of these absolutely monumental changes that are already here, already happening.
And so here, I think it's important to speak a bit about the importance of design for creating the right and proper XR experience. So in your opinion, how much design is important when we're creating the VR or AR experience?
Oh, I think it's super important. And I think people, a very small percentage of the population, the fortunate ones, are able to experience with things like the quality of space. I believe good design in space and architecture has the power to affect your mood. It has the power to completely change how you go about your life and what you do, either in an office building or in a home. But how many of us are aware of those things? And how many of us were ever in a position in our lives to have a say in that? Probably only the ones that were able to build their own buildings and their own houses and hire private architects to do these things for them. But everyone else is not aware of these effects and just lives in what they can find, in the whatever apartment and house they can afford, in whatever office building they were able to get a job in. So they're never able to just stop and ask, hey, this is cool, but what if this hallway here would be 1 meter taller and 2 meter wider, and would have been painted pink? Would that change my life in any way? And the answer is absolutely. We just regular people just never engage with these issues. But in VR, all of a sudden the entry point into architecture, into notions of space design, it's much, much lower. Of course, it's still expensive to hire someone like myself to design your virtual house, but it's much, much cheaper than if you were to hire me to design your actual house.
But with new tools that are created right now, and as I see, you have design with VR on your website with creative tools, where basically you can design a home right inside VR. And so here, if we create a very pleasant UI and UX experience, and a person is able to redesign their own home in real life in VR, this can actually give a person an opportunity before hiring an architect to make a simple house, then walk inside this house every day, and every day make some simple changes, some small changes, so they can create an ideal house. Like in TikTok, when you're like scrolling the feed, and every time, every scroll you make, every like you put, the next video becomes more and more interesting. And so if we could design spaces to live in the same kind of way, and maybe then in the future with the power of AI to actually be able to design spaces for people based on their psychological characteristics, based on their demographics, and fully based on their needs, this could actually change the way that we live and that we interact with spaces a lot.
Absolutely, yes. And the goal behind the application that we're working on is exactly that. So we want people to start to see space as a new medium that they have creative access to. So if someone is passionate about painting right now, let's say they're not a professional artist, but they really are attracted to color and they want to fool around with some paints, they can go to the store, buy a box of paints for a few bucks, some brushes, and just play around with paint. And maybe they like it. Maybe they'll never become Picasso, but then maybe it relaxes them. So it's something they do every Sunday. I want to do that with space. Forget about architecture, forget about design, forget about all these disciplines that for me are already fast becoming part of our past. I just want to focus on the notion of space. We've never had space as a pure medium in design before. So now you go into VR and a regular person can go and just play around with space on a Sunday afternoon. Make a room that's all pink or blue or green and sit there for half an hour and see how they feel. And maybe they get inspired to paint their living room in that color because they realize it makes them so happy. So yeah, absolutely. And a big component of this is in giving people more agency and making them more literate when it comes to space and architecture, and less reliant on architects because they can just play with it themselves.
And this again tells us about how culture and history is cyclic, because people had the agency to control their space fully and design it like fully to their needs, like 5 or 10,000 years ago, because then you were building your own house with your family, with your tribe together. But then with the development of the humanity and with the separation of classes and etc., we lost that ability, because right now we buy houses, we don't build them by ourselves. But right now with new technologies, we're going back to this prehistoric era when we were like building everything by our hands. And now we can not only focus on the functionality of our spaces, because I think if you live in the forest, you don't really think about the beauty or the emotions of your space. You mostly think about how to survive. But right now this comes back to us, but it comes back with the notion of creating the space that also gives you the right emotions. And I would like to ask you a question to you right now. So as you know, the medium is the message. And so what is the message that space gives to us?
Wow, man. You're shooting at me all the good and hard questions. What is the message of VR? So for me, the answer that I'm gonna give now is very personal. So I'm not making any definitive statement. For me personally, the most important thing is what I was hinting at earlier, which is the medium is going to help us realize that maybe we are much more complex beings than we thought we were. We have powers in our minds and abilities to change perspectives, and ability to feel things and experience things that go way beyond what is offered to us. One, by physical reality, and two, by what is offered to us by the current cultures that we're in. because the cultures that we're born in and we live in also act a little bit like frames of experience. They dictate what we should do and what we should not do. They dictate what we are able to choose as something to do in an afternoon. I think VR is going to massively expand that in a way that no single culture or social or political system is going to be able to move fast enough to just frame that and confine that. So we're gonna see more freedom, and we're gonna see a redefinition of what human beings are.
But freedom in this kind of way always comes with more polarizations, because right now, in comparison to what was 50 years ago, we are much more locked up with the people who have the similar opinions to us, with people who have similar thoughts than us, and people who have the similar moral codes as us. Because with internet, with Reddit, with social media, we can only speak with those people who we like. But with the development of the space and with the development of XR, we'd be able to be in the same space with the people who are the same minded with us. And you can grow up and live all your life in one space with the people who you think are the right people, and never visit other people. Because right now you have to go outside, you have to walk down the street, you have to meet a person who you might not like. But with our like movement into XR, we'll be able to be only with the people that we like. And so do you think that this kind of polarization could happen and could result in some problems?
Yes, I think it will very likely happen. I think all the negative things we're seeing right now happening on screen-based social media are going to get exponentially worse in VR social platforms. Yes. What's the solution to that? I think at a base level, the solution is that people like ourselves that are involved in designing these platforms and conceptualizing what the heck is going on with this new tech, don't just talk about architecture, design, and colors, but also get our hands dirty with talking about politics and culture and privacy and all of those things. So even if you are a designer, no, you cannot just do buttons and UX. Even if you're an architect coming to VR, no, you cannot just talk about couches and furniture and make that wall blue. You have a moral responsibility to also engage in these questions to prevent exactly those kind of dangers.
There is a very interesting topic that is pretty niche right now, but I think it's going to explode in 5 to 6 years. And the topic is governance as a service companies. So, for example, right now we live under the government, and the government fulfills all of our needs. But this government is very analog. It's very much connected to the real world. And this government is trying to get in the digital world, but it's not able to fully get into it. But when our lives are going to fully move into the digital world and into metaverses, probably these metaverses are going to be something very similar to the government. And so they will play the role of the government, but just inside this kind of virtual spaces. Do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think traditional governments and countries are a thing of the past, just the way physical architecture and established concepts of urbanism are something in the past. Facebook is the biggest country in the world. It has more inhabitants than China. And I think in the future, we're going to see a push towards redefining notions of citizenship. And once we see any kind of step in that direction, then we're up for some political and social turmoil. We're already seeing young people, the young generations are already identifying with their idols based on style and personality, and not identifying so strongly anymore with their nationality. But of course, that kind of tendency is also there. So I think maybe we're going to see two ruptures in that sense. So yeah, And VR, I think, is actually going to contribute to the turmoil. It's going to be maybe a central thing in the battleground. And we're going to have to see how VR will position itself with respect. It's going to be pulled in many different directions.
Here, thank you so much for this answer. And I think the last question, and one of the most important ones, what is your vision for your agency for the next 5 to 10 years?
We want to start a conversation about space beyond physical reality. We call ourselves designers of spatial experiences beyond or across realities. So I want to start a discourse and a discipline and a dialogue about the experience of space, regardless of the medium of that experience. So I want people to come to us, and they are already coming to us with projects that have a spatial concept and include spatial interactions, regardless of the medium, regardless whether that project is about building something with brick and mortar or coding something for them.
Okay, and so how do you want to achieve that?
Well, the biggest weapon that we have is we have people that are both traditionally trained designers or architects and coders. So rather than taking an approach where you have interdisciplinary teams, we like having interdisciplinary people where a single person can be 2-in-1 or 3-in-1. And I call this postdisciplinary. So as I hinted many times before, I believe that these disciplines, architecture, design, UX, UI, healthcare, are going to go out the window. And we're going to rely more and more on people who can cross them, who are fluid in between a wider range of human issues. Let's just call them human needs and human issues. And these people will be free to reconfigure what their specialty is, or what are what kind of knowledge is needed to solve that one human issue, rather than force it into a discipline and then find some person who has, as you mentioned, higher education in that particular discipline, although most of human issues and problems are actually cross-disciplinary.
So Andreea, thank you so much. This was, I think, one of the best conversations that we have. You're a super interesting person. It was a big pleasure for me to spend this hour with you. I think it was the best hour in my last 2 weeks. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I got some of the most amazing questions. So I'm very grateful. I took some notes. I'm going to keep thinking of some of the stuff you asked. So thank you.